Hi folks, this is Dr. Rob CYWES. I am the Carb Addiction Doc. And today's video is kind of a 101 video. It's a starter video, but I think it's worthwhile for everybody, advanced, beginner, to listen to and understand at least our approach and our understanding. Today's video is going to be understanding carbohydrates. And I'm not going to go into the science or the damage or the harm. The assumption I'm going to make first and foremost is that you are interested in beginning or following or modifying or getting better at being on a low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet. The keto component of the diet is about increasing fat and living on fat. I'm going to ignore that for now. Ultimately, the way to get there, though, is by lowering your carbohydrates. And there are multiple beneficial biologic reasons why it's good to lower your carbohydrates. So let's talk about carbohydrates. First and foremost, what does carbohydrates mean? Carbohydrates are basically a term that describes all forms of sugar and starch, okay? There are three primary sources of sugar. There's glucose, which is the most prevalent one. There's fructose, and there is galactose. And both fructose, glucose, and galactose are naturally occurring sugars. And whether the product is man-made or human-made, like a donut, or whether the product comes from bees' honey or from sugarcane or from milk, it's exactly the same molecule. Glucose is a six-sided carbon-based molecule that consists of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And there's energy that is contained in those bonds between those carbon molecules. Fructose is exactly the same, and galactose is exactly the same, except the arrangement of the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen molecules are slightly different. But those are the three primary sugars. They're called monosaccharides. Lactose, for example, or maltose or sucrose are combinations of two of those joined together. And then starches, your pastas, your breads, your rices, your potatoes, your corn, those are multiple chains of these carbohydrates joined together. And in plants, we call those starches. In animals, the arrangement is slightly different, but when animals store sugar, we call that glycogen. And it's a 1,4 or 1,6 bonded glycogen. It depends on how the molecules are connected to each other. So animal kind of starch, the stored stuff in your liver and your muscles, we call that glycogen. But when a plant stores sugar, it's called starch. Same thing. So carbohydrates are starches, glycogen, and various forms of sugar-bonded molecules. That's it. But ultimately, all of that is glucose, fructose, galactose. And here's the first thing. It doesn't matter how the carbohydrate goes in your mouth. It doesn't matter what form it takes. It doesn't matter if it's an apple or a donut. It doesn't matter if it is honey or a Coke or cane sugar or a piece of bread. It doesn't matter if it's brown bread or white bread. Okay? And it's so important to understand that. It doesn't matter how the sugar goes into your bloodstream, because what happens is as soon as it gets in the mouth, you've got enzymes that start to break those sugars down, those starches down into their individual sugars. You got amylase in the mouth, stomach acid will churn and break those down a little bit, and then the upper intestine breaks those sugars down into the three basic sugars: glucose, fructose, galactose. Those are the sugars that get absorbed into the bloodstream, and almost 100% of that sugar, apart from the little bit that's used by the gut as energy, about 100% of that sugar goes first and foremost to the liver up the portal vein. So the liver sees glucose, galactose, and fructose as its primary sugar load. Okay? So here's the first myth or the first bullshit the dietitians will tell you, or that the public out there, oh, these are natural carbohydrates, they're okay. Oh, these are healthy carbohydrates, they're whole grains. Body doesn't work that way. Okay? Body doesn't work that way. Doesn't matter if alcohol that you drink goes in as a glass of red wine with a lot of antioxidants or a shot of tequila that's basically pure alcohol. What matters is the alcohol that enters your bloodstream. Exactly the same when it comes to carbohydrates. The passengers, the minerals, vitamins, proteins that come along with the carbohydrates do not matter. They don't make the carbohydrates healthy if you're on a low-carb diet. So anybody that tells you that there is a difference of type of carbohydrate, that these are healthy, these are not, knows absolutely nothing about human biology. So please, please, please understand that there isn't any difference based upon how the carbohydrates enter your mouth. Now, like everything, there's one major exception. There's one major exception, okay? And this is important to understand. There is one category of carbohydrates, glucose and fructose, that do not get processed or broken down by the human body. So the human body has lost the capacity to break down carbohydrates from plants that are locked into a molecule called cellulose. Cellulose is the green part of the plant. Well, the green is actually chlorophyll, but it's locked into the fibrous part of the plant. So if you're eating plant cellulose, the human body cannot break that cellulose down. It passes through the gut and you poop it out. And that's kind of what we call fiber. Fiber is not necessary. Fiber is not necessary for the human intestine. We'll talk about that on another video. But the one exception are the cellulose-containing plants. Those we don't break down. So all other carbohydrates, doesn't matter how it goes in your mouth, they get broken down to glucose, fructose, galactose, get absorbed. The only ones that don't get absorbed are the cellulose-containing carbohydrates. They pass straight through. Now, why is that important? Because as we, in our practice, design a low-carbohydrate diet, the first step, understanding what we just talked about, the first step that you want to understand when you're starting to look at a low-carb diet is education. Okay, educate yourself. So for the first few days, for the first few weeks, maybe even for the first few months on a low-carb diet, I want you to follow a dietitian mentality. We want to get away from that eventually as we live our lives. But I want you to follow a dietitian mentality, and that is to look at the total carbohydrate content of what's going in your mouth. Now, when I talked about the cellulose, I just want to take a minute here as a segue because this is an important concept to understand. One of the first major low-carb people that popularized this was Dr. Atkins, who was actually a cardiologist, did a brilliant job of helping us to understand low carbohydrate, the benefits of low carbohydrate diet when it came to weight loss and cardiovascular benefit. So, but what Dr. Atkins did is he said, okay, let's look at the diet and let's look at the carbohydrates that actually get broken down and absorbed. And they did all these mathematical formulas of net carbohydrates and subtracting net carbohydrates are total carbohydrates where you've subtracted the sugar alcohols and the cellulose and a variety of carbohydrates that typically are not going to be absorbed into the human intestine. And they created all these mathematical formulas around net carbohydrates, which was absolutely scientifically solid. But of course, like anything in a free capitalist society, a concept like that gets manipulated by the economic industry that's trying to sell you stuff. Okay? So it is true that net carbohydrates are the ones that get absorbed, and you want as close to zero net carbohydrates as possible. The problem, though, folks, in the modern era, the truth is gone. The truth is gone. And to make it simpler, to make it easier, we no longer focus on any of the mathematics, and I would urge you to abandon this. Every one of my physician and healthcare friends that are experts in the space, and I'm not an expert, I'm just a student, I listen to them. They all talk about total carbohydrates, not net carbohydrates. If anyone is talking about net carbohydrates, they're trying to sell you something. It's a pitch. So if someone is a commercial diet and they say, oh, we're low carb, these are the amount of net carbohydrates you need, they're trying to sell you something. They're trying to get you to eat carbohydrates and pretend it's okay. It's like a low-tar cigarette. Still a cigarette, folks. Or a low-alcohol beer. This is a light beer, folks. Very safe for the alcoholic to drink. No, it's not. No, it's not. Ignore net carbohydrates. Ignore the concept of net. Go with total. Because the mathematical formulae will get you into trouble. Okay, having said that, so we're going to look at total carbohydrates. So starting out on the carbohydrate reduction journey, number one is education and contemplation. Get to know where they are in your diet. Okay, so the first principle in our practice, okay, now I want to go on a low-carb diet, is know where they are. And the simple thing is most products are going to have it on the little label at the back. And I don't care about calories. I don't care about net carbs. I don't care about sugars. I care about total carbohydrates. But for the most part, Google is your friend. You don't need a carb counter. You don't need any of that nonsense. You don't need any of those. And you certainly shouldn't subscribe to any diet program and pay money for this. It requires no money spent. But Google total carbohydrate content of a Granny Smith apple, total carbohydrate content of a donut, total carbohydrate content of a ribeye steak. Educate yourself with where the carbohydrates are obvious and hidden in what you're about to eat. Total carbohydrate content of whatever it is that you're eating. Educate yourself with that knowledge. And remember, the goal, with one exception, is zero. Zero. Oh, but you can have some berries. There are only 3 grams of carbohydrates in a strawberry. We'll come to that in a second, okay? Doesn't mean that strawberries are okay. But educate yourself first before you change. And also, look at what you're drinking. Once you have that education, once you know where they are, you then want to be very binary in your approach. Yes or no. The alcoholic does not need to know how much alcohol there is in a drink. They just decide, yes, that's got alcohol, it's on my no list. No, this has no alcohol, it's on my yes list. Don't let anybody tell you oh, this is healthier for you. It doesn't work that way. This is binary. Yes, no. So eventually, when you look at something to eat or drink, you don't have to know what the carbohydrate content is. But because you've done your homework, you know what that carb content was historically. I can look at any food and say yes or no based on my binary knowledge. And that's how you live this life long term. Not by some mathematical formula and writing stuff down, calculating, and I'm allowed this. No. Binary. Yes, no. Yes, no. Yes, no. Yes, no. Yes, no. Yes, no. It's the way it works. Okay? Now, when you look at carbohydrates in food, we already talked about the vegetables all having carbohydrates. So to really screw you up a little bit, in our practice of carbohydrate addiction, carbohydrates do not do damage. Carbohydrates do not do damage. It's our relationship with carbohydrates where we're using them as a drug for emotion support, for emotional management. And that relationship is broken. In the carb addiction model, it is our relationship with carbohydrates that's the problem. Alcohol's not a problem. I drink alcohol. But if you're an alcoholic, your relationship with it is broken. So the reason you want to go low carb for most people is for a purpose, to correct a negative. You're diabetic, you've got cardiovascular disease, you want to lose some weight. If we're going to do that, you want to eliminate triggering carbohydrates from your diet to be able to change your behavior. So the first category is, what do I drink? What do I drink? And the key thing about anything that you drink, sharp divide, yes, no, nothing that you drink should ever contain calories or carbohydrates. Nothing that you drink should contain carbohydrates. Now, if you're going to drink a Gatorade Zero, okay, it's got 2 grams of carbohydrate in it. That's okay. For a big bottle, that's okay. Okay, those are minuscule, but you want to be super careful. You want to be as close to zero as possible. For example, over here, folks, I've got a ketone IQ. Okay, the ketone IQ has got some calories in it. Okay, let me see how many. Ketone IQ has no carbohydrates, 0 carbohydrates, okay? A bottle like this has 70 calories in it. Now, ketone IQ is something that we use early on to get into ketosis. And the reason I use the ketone IQ is because your ketones go up and stay up. We'll talk about this in other videos. But the ketone IQ, and if you're looking for these, you can get them from hvmn.com. HV is in Victor, mn.com. And if you use Carb Addiction Doc, you can get a 20% as a promo code. You can get a 20% discount. So the ketone IQ is one of the few liquids that does contain calories that are okay to drink as a shot to get into ketosis. And in other of my videos, you'll see where I use them. So that's one exception. The other exception for calories in what you drink is I put a little bit of heavy whipping cream in my coffee, maybe 1 or 2 tablespoons in a big mug of coffee to suppress appetite. So that's an exception. You can put a little bit of butter in there, you can put a little bit of MCT oil in there, or you can use your exogenous ketones. Those are the only allowable calories, at least in our program, in terms of what you drink. Okay, so that's the first category. The next boundaries, the next category that we look at is what should I eat? And it's very simple, no carbohydrates. No carbohydrates, with one exception. So if we have rigid boundaries, no carbohydrates, what can I eat? All animal products, absolutely fine to eat. All animal products. All eggs, all dairy, all red meat, or white meat, or fish, or poultry, absolutely fine to eat, depending on how you like it. The big conundrum category are vegetables. And it's very simple because we count nothing in our practice. When it comes to carbohydrates, all vegetables are free with 3 absolute exceptions. No grain products of any kind. I don't care if it's white bread, brown bread, couscous, quinoa, all the sexy California grains, they're all on the no list. No rice, no oatmeal, no rice. Oatmeal's a grain. And no potatoes of any kind, including sweet potatoes. Those are the hard no's. All other vegetables are absolutely fine to eat. Oh, but corn's got so much peas and carrots. I've never met a fat person who rushed home after a rough day and pigged out on Brussels sprouts. Yes, there are carbohydrates in all vegetables by definition, but the human intestine doesn't absorb them very well. Does not absorb them very well. If you want to leave them out by all means, but they're perfectly fine for the next 50 years of my life, actually now it's 40 years, because I'm going to drop it 100, of my life to eat, because they do not trigger my addiction. So all animal products are fine, all vegetables are fine with a hard no, no grain products, no rices, no potatoes. I don't count anything. All fruit is on the no list, including berries. Berries are just baby fruit, said Eric Westman. The only fruit that we eat, avocados and olives. Avos have a little bit of carbohydrate, but they're one of the only foods out there that have a high fat percentage. That's it. It's not difficult, folks. Carbohydrates are not difficult. The dietitians make them crazy difficult because of all these mathematical formulas. And oh, you can't have this, you can't have it. Come on, man. Keep it simple. Keep it simple and you're going to be fine. Know where the carbohydrates are. Once you know where they are, it's binary. Yes, no. And then focus on what you can eat and what you are going to eat and what you choose to eat. So you don't feel deprived of what you're not eating. Am I going to have ribeye steak tonight? Am I going to have a salad with that? A low-carb diet, very, very simple. Binary. Yes, no. You want 0 non-vegetable carbohydrates, and the vegetable carbohydrates don't count. How difficult is that? That, folks, can become a lifestyle. If you're sitting there trying to calculate everything and try 30 grams of carbohydrates for it, now you're playing games. And the addiction model, if ever you are asked to control a relationship, you can have a little bit but not a lot. Then imagine that if you're an alcoholic. Oh, you can have a little drink, but you can't have more than 1 beer. Or you can only use a little bit of heroin on a Tuesday. Come on, man. Don't try to control a relationship you've lost control of. Become binary in your thinking if you are going to treat this as a carbohydrate addiction. Yes, no. And then in the yes category, love it and select from it and make that your life. Empower yourself. Don't feel deprived. Please leave comments down below. And if you are still clinging on, to your mathematical formula, if you're still clinging on to, I can only eat 30 grams. Folks, in my opinion, and this is going to be harsh, but in my opinion, you are clinging on to failure. You're clinging on to failure. And here's why. You cannot break a habit you are still doing. So if you're clinging on to 30 grams or 40 grams or 50 grams of carbohydrates, you are clinging onto the habits that made you fat and sick. Yes, no breaks those habits. Leave comments down below. Yell at me, shout at me, scream at me. Now, if the vegetables don't do well, if they irritate your gut or don't eat them. But don't demonize them. I am the Carb Addiction Doc. If you're interested in a consult, if you're interested in trying to formulate an addiction world for yourself that is different from the diet world that has failed everybody and will fail you over time, give me a shout. Come and talk to SHERYL, our dietitian, ERIN Smith, our nurse practitioner, our psych nurse practitioner, myself. Text, WhatsApp, call 561-517-0642. Our contact information is in the show notes.